7:05. All right, I love Success and Ed night.
A great night.
So we have an agenda that is mostly unfinished business tonight. However, as part of that unfinished business, we do have the second reading of policy 1400. And I'd like to make a motion that we table the second reading of policy 1400 until the meeting on December 7th.
I will second that motion.
All right, a motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Next, we will have board comments.
Yeah.
Director Ledoux, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can start off with board comments. So Success in Education Night, once again, I'm probably just gonna say the same thing, and you guys are all gonna say, agree with Peter. It's one of the best nights, right? I mean, our whole goal here at the board, first and foremost, is to make sure that our students are being the best version of themselves, whatever that version may be, through the school district. And this is a perfect night to highlight that all the way from, from Mountain Way all the way up through the high school over into Crossroads. So it's an excellent showcase of all the success that we truly are seeing within the school district. So also something to showcase the success within the school district or what we're actually working on our conferences. So that's been first and foremost on my mind, as well as a parent with a student at the high school as well as Mountain Way. They're different, right? In the high school, they're kind of like 6-minute speed dating sessions. And you try to get as much information as you can. One thing that I would say is a lot of times I think that these conferences end up feeling like almost like zombie meetings, like kind of like tasks where you go in and you figure out some information, especially at the high school when you have so many in a row. Really, I mean, you have the opportunity, unless you're an extremely active parent that is constantly emailing teachers and trying to figure out what's going on and stuff, right? It's a perfect time. You're in front of the teacher. They have your attention. Ask the questions, of how can I ensure that my student is being successful at home? Grades are a fantastic output, but the main thing that we're looking to achieve during these conferences is the input that your students are putting into school. And so the only way that can happen is by asking the teachers, what are some activities that I could be doing at home to challenge or change my child's input so that they could improve their grades, their understanding? Because once again, grades are they're a good measuring device, but leaving calculus with an understanding of why you do certain things is much more important than the actual grade at the end of it. So I just wanted to say my piece there, right? Understanding it's a two-way street too, as well. Educators, teachers, if there are certain students that you see that potential in and you see that, ask the parents as well, right? What should I be looking out for in school? What are some certain signs? What are things that interest your student more? Take notes. You might not be able to take advantage of all of them, but some information is better than none. So kick it off there, but Success in Ed, great night.
My turn. Yeah. Director Finchie.
I just wanted to wish you a huge congratulations to everyone who won tonight in Success in Ed. It was really fun to see everybody get their awards. And just a special shout out to Ariel from Crossroads. Her mama works with my dad, and their whole office was really excited that Ariel was winning today. So I got text messages today. So that's really exciting. And just kind of echoing what Peter said, kind of said everything. I don't have experience with the parent conferences and the higher grades, just the elementaries. But what I can add to it is that I was really pleased to see some things added this time around. Getting our iReady scores was, scores not great, but it was nice to have that information. And also, I don't know if all the teachers did this, but at least both of my daughters gave us information on how we can help at home facilitate more growth in our students. So that was really neat to see. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Director Carey.
Yeah, ditto. Success in Education is wonderful. I appreciate the board excusing my absence from last meeting, but a huge shout out to our IT department It is wonderful to be able to watch the YouTube and get every single bit, see every bit of the presentation, and the speaker at the same time. You guys have really done a great job, and I appreciate it. We don't have a board report, so I don't have a ledge report part of the agenda. So I'm going to kind of smush that together real quick with my board comments. I watched the meeting last meeting, and the board had a really good, deep, robust conversation related to special ed, and it looks like that there was some direction through the board wanted through the superintendent to have some more kind of study and feedback on that, which I think is a really good idea. Just a couple of things just to kind of add my thoughts into the conversation. So Director Ledoux was talking about, the cap that the state puts on special ed. It's 13.5%. Basically everything over that we have to go through safety net to get, as you guys saw in the presentation. We never get what we're asking for due to technicalities and stuff like that. And this will kind of roll into my ledge comments here in a second. But one of the things that I find really interesting about special education, and I want to echo the point of we absolutely have to follow IEPs. If an IEP says that we need a para, that is definitely something that we have to do. But I had a really interesting conversation, and I'll just hit the high points over the last couple of months. Recently, the Washington Association for School Psychs was here up in it was in SeaTac. And my best friend just happens to be going to Gonzaga to be a school psych. So she was up here, and I got the opportunity to have dinner with her and her professor in Gonzaga. And this, her professor has, 15 years in data analysis and data study with a focus on special education. And now he's moved on to the professor. And I tried really hard not to have a conversation about school, but I couldn't help myself. And so the conversation came up, and this was kind of the point of the board conversation, where he asked me kind of, what our SPED population here is. And I said, well, it's close to 20%. And he goes, what? I go, yeah, it's close to 20%. And he says, well, that's a significant anomaly. And I said, yeah, I know. And he goes, well, you want to hear my thoughts? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Who wouldn't want the thoughts of someone as educated as you are? And he goes, well, I guarantee you some of those kids are educational casualties concealed as special needs. I said, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, what? He goes, I spent most of my career analyzing data, going through iReady. He goes, what preventative measures are you guys doing to identify kids that are moving in that direction a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road? And I was like, I don't know. He goes, okay, well, there's ways to tear into iReady data that will identify those markers, those things that goes up, so that you can put interventions in their path so that that's not their destination. I go, wow, yeah, I don't know if we're doing that or to what depth that we're doing that, but that's a really good point. And he goes, and then what's your plan to get those kids out of special education? I said, well, I'm not really sure about that. And again, that's kind of the heart of the board discussion of, well, what's the plan to transition them out of that? And again, there are certainly behavioral and things like that, but he goes, that number tells me a couple of things. And I said, what? He goes, your scores are significantly below the state average. And I go, well, yep, yeah, they are. And he goes, that percentage of special ed is a symptom, or is the low test scores is the symptom, and the higher special ed is a result of that. That froze me in my thought, because I guess I'd never connected those two things, right? And this is a guy who literally, this is his profession. This is what he does, okay? So actually, we have a meeting, Dr. Middleton and I, with him when in Spokane, because I said, stop there. Number one, the conversations reached over my head. But I think there's some really good things that you're saying here that I want to get my superintendent in front of. And he was like, I'd love to talk with you guys. And he goes, I'd love to even, look at some of the things you got, and I'd help you out in any way that I can. I was like, I'll take you up on that. Are you kidding me? So we'll meet with him the Wednesday night when we get into WASDA. But, one of the parts that was missing, at least for me, that I would love, and if Dr. Middleton was here, because Dr. Middleton is who we direct, and he directs staff. But One of the things I would like Dr. Middleton to do outside of that is let's have a deep dive, as well as, our plan to transition kids out of special ed, but let's have a deep conversation of what interventions, the specific process we're doing to stop kids from falling into special ed, right? Because I think that is as important as the transition out of it. So I'd like for Dr. Middleton to do that, and I'll certainly talk more about that. So kind of leading right into my legislative priorities portion, so I was at a meeting in Olympia, so we've prioritized kind of all of the things that kind of came out of General Assembly. Now that they have produced what they call their one page, which is funny because it's front and back. So I guess it technically is one page. So the priorities of WASDA this legislative session, there's really 5 of them. The number one, and this goes right into our discussion, is to meet the requirements of special ed. And what WASDA is going to work this legislative session is we ask the legislature to invest fully in the mandatory services for eligible students, expand access to inclusionary practices, remove the artificial cap, that 13.5 we talked about, eliminate application penalties, and recognize the costs vary for every district based on the uniqueness of each student community. And there's actually been a good bit of talk about that. I actually had a short conversation with Representative Berg, who's the representative of the 44th, and that's one of the big parts of the things that she wants to get done this late session. And she's on the educational committee, so hopefully that happens. Second, provide the needed resources for ample, equitable, and stable education. We asked the legislature to stabilize district operations program obligations, and there's a couple other bullet points, but my favorite one is work to close regionalization factor gaps between adjacent districts. As I was talking to the board, I've worked very hard to make that a forefront of what they're working on, and I was very happy to be able to get to the end of that road. Feed students. We asked legislature to ensure that no students hunger during the day by providing universal free and nutritious school meals. I feel very positive that something really meaningful can happen on this lead session. It feels like a lot of people are talking about that. Construct safe and healthy schools. We asked the legislature to protect students and staff by securing their physical, social, emotional safety through an updated and relevant school construction formula. I think that would be great. And transport each and every student. We asked the legislature to provide equitable access to basic ed by covering all costs related to student transportation. I don't know if you guys know this, but if you live within, is it a 1 mile radius, Marshall? Yeah, if you live in a 1 mile radius, the state does not pay us to transport you. So rain, sleet, shine, snow, darkness, whatever. If you live in a mile radius, your kid needs to walk. If you don't have the ability to be able to take them, to me, that's unfathomable, right? Because there's a lot of things, a lot of major roads the kids have to cross between here and there. Our crossing guards are great. Matter of fact, part of the high point of my day heading to work is waving to the high school crossing guard, and she sees me, she seems so happy, and it makes me feel good. I really enjoy seeing her out every day. But the state needs to help us out here, as well as on a number of things. So really excited about that also. That's all I've got.
I have a few questions, just honestly, one just out of curiosity, because our buses, maybe this isn't the audience, maybe Marshall knows this, but because our buses share schools, I think it's actually physically impossible for any person to be a mile away while still being on a route, right? So like Suncrest Farms, for instance, is not a mile away from the high school, but it is a mile away from the middle school, and they share a bus. So like bus 10 or whatever is taking that route. Is that bus not stopping at the high school?
We don't, if that student is, I believe they have to stop the high school, but we don't get any state funding for that student being on the bus.
Okay, just checking. That was just my curiosity. As I was saying, they're thinking of, we have 2 routes and they split. The other thing, you mentioned meals for this legislative session. Does that affect this school year at all, or would that be going forward to future?
Yeah, so it would be future school year, probably. Yeah, or not probably, definitely.
Okay.
It would be,
Okay. That's it.
Any other questions? Ava?
It has been reported to me that that parent drivers during the morning on drop off on the 100th Street across the high school are not following the posted speed limit of 20 miles per hour and ignoring students waiting to cross at the crosswalk located in front of the high school. The community social media page members voiced several concerns regarding poor visibility of students in the dark, gloomy mornings, and failure on the part of some drivers to pay attention. On behalf of the student body and for the continued safety of my fellow students, I would like to ask the board to consider installing a high visibility crosswalk to alert drivers that they need to slow down and stop for students waiting at the crosswalks. When my mother was in 8th grade, she witnessed a terrible scene where one of her classmates had been struck by a vehicle on a crosswalk. His heart stopped as he severed a traumatic brain injury and never recovered from, and to this day, he lives in a nursing home. The following year, a light up crosswalk was installed.
So question, comment, is that okay? So I saw this communication also on Facebook and it broke my heart. It kind of leads to the transportation piece a little bit. So I know that it is there's a lot of agencies that have to go into doing something like that. And that's obviously not a problem that we could solve tonight at this board meeting. But, I would certainly advocate for us to have this on an agenda item at another time, and let's have that conversation where we can make some discussion, maybe make some motions, maybe invite the city or something along those lines. Dr. Cruz? I don't want to contradict.
Which is it from your church?
Yeah.
The church?
From the
Okay.
church over.
Okay. Yeah, we actually have a little more power on that. So I think we could probably work with Brent at the city to get something put in there.
Yeah. So I'd love to get it on it if we can, get on an agenda item or something like that. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Do you have any other high school comments?
I think it might be in here.
It's okay. So interesting that you brought that up. I promise we did not coordinate on this at all. I had no idea. But I'm pretty certain my daughter was the girl in the crosswalk that was not seen, not slowed down for, and she's all of 5 feet, half an inch tall. And at 7:05, 7:10 in the morning, it's not light outside. There is reflective paint in the crosswalk. There's overhead lighting nearby, but with the fog and stuff, it's not very well lit, and it's not newly reflectively painted. So I was actually going to mention, I think it was your mom that posting, or maybe I just saw your mom comment on it, but I read the comment. And I appreciated that because I'm pretty sure I talked to my daughter after I saw it, and I'm pretty sure it was her that was crossing that morning. So I was actually going to bring it up today. So thank you. Thanks for looking out for the other students. And we will definitely put it on the agenda so that we can have more public conversation about that. But I will ask Dr. Middleton to speak to, the city, or what we can do between now and the next board meeting to even do something today so that we can end up. I want to just talk real briefly about parent-teacher conferences. I had 12, which for me is a low number because when I had all 6 of my kids in the district, and I had 2 at the high school, 2 at the middle school, 1 at Monte Cristo and 1 at Mountain Way. That year I did 28 conferences in one day because they were on one day. And I thought, boy, the elementary teachers got half days, like for a week, to do less than 28, and I did 28 in a day. So I appreciate the middle school and the high school. We did the high school conferences by Zoom. The middle school we went in, but it was a good opportunity for us to, we actually had our son come to the conferences as well and sit down in the chair with us and have those conversations. And it's good when you're all on the same page at the same time. So appreciate the effort at both schools and the effort of the teachers to prepare. And yeah, that was a good experience. And I appreciate I'm glad that you watched the last meeting and the conversation about special ed. Dr. Middleton mentioned, I guess we didn't talk about this, but Dr. Middleton mentioned that we would have an update at the December meeting. So we should hear more then. All right. I have to say, okay. So next on our agenda is the business report by Marshall Cruz. Do you want to, or do we have?
prepared the report and I'm just open for questions.
All right.
I'll start. Mark, I guess one of the things, Marshall, and just talk me through that, I guess is I'm always challenged by, and is always a head scratcher, is that, you know, I understand the heart of why we went over budget pretty much across the board, because, you know, enrollment was up, right?
Yeah.
And so enrollment is up, you know, and certainly the state gives additional revenue, right? And so you have to, you know, hire new teachers and expand services. I guess the part of it that always scratches my head, because in and of itself, more students is more good than bad, right? It allows for, being able to spread costs across more students, so economies of scale. Not every teacher is at necessarily their capacity, right? So we don't necessarily have to, it's not necessarily 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 where for every student we have to hire more teachers or anything like that. So, at the end of the day, that should be, there should be more positive than negative there. I guess the part of that scratches my head is that, we ended up spending more than we got even with that additional revenue. And I struggle, I guess, to make that make sense in my head. So I guess I'm kind of asking you to help it make sense for me. And I guess the other part that I don't understand specifically is that what, if any, checks and balances do we have in the system that is a horn that goes off that says, "Oh, guys, we've got some issues. We're going to spend more than our revenue, which is going to take from our fund balance. We need to, this or that." I'm not necessarily talking about things that impact the educational environment, but there's certainly other things that we can be like, "Oh, well, sorry, we can't do that this year," or, let's cut back on that, or, take principals, let's cut 10%, or, those types of things that goes, hey, that puts a wall up that allows us to at least, right? Because, all the work that we're doing to get to a 5% fund balance, if we're still in this cycle of, spending more than we make, which, I don't want to over exaggerate, certainly isn't something that happens every year, right? We're never going to be able to, continue to move forward to where we have. So I guess I said a lot there. That's really the heart of my question.
We had significant challenges last year. Coming out of the pandemic, we still wanted to operate a virtual academy, and the virtual academy had 3 teachers, and they probably served 25 kids. We had, I think, the slide that Beth had last week or 2 weeks ago about the paraeducators. There would probably be a very similar slide on student supervision as well. That is probably pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, it probably doubled also. Kids came back with really not knowing how to be students anymore. And it was very challenging to reintroduce them into the population of students. So we had twice as many paraeducators as we did before the pandemic, and we didn't really need them during the pandemic. So really, we went from 25 to 50 paraeducators. Similar thing happened with student supervisors. We went into this year with the goal to dial that back to a normal level. We're 2 months into the school year. We're reviewing that right now. There's still tremendous pressure from the buildings to add paraeducators and to add student supervisors because it's still very challenging to handle the behaviors of a lot of the behaviors we're seeing, especially at the elementary level. We're trying to dial it back to what it was pre-pandemic, but there's a lot of pressure. And then also a lot of our growth is happening in the K-3 level. And with the salaries we pay and the 17-to-1 class size ratio, we really don't get benefit of students in the K-3 range. It's at best cost neutral. A lot of districts make the choice not even to abide by the 17-to-1 ratio. They'd rather take the funding loss from the state than meet the 17-to-1 ratio because it's cheaper for them to return money to the state than it is to pay for a 17-to-1 class ratio.
So I guess help me what can I do as a board member? You know, what don't we have in a policy, or what don't we have? Because, you know, so that sounds the horn, or that gives me enough visualization to go, okay, you know, is this para required by an IEP or something? No, it's not. Okay. Is this para or this hire or whatever, is this, you know, is this required by policy or state? No. Okay. So will this hire put us over, you know, our revenue? Yes. Okay. Well, then I'm sorry, the hiring's not approved. Like what don't we have that we need to have, or system, or what that allows me to make that educated, you know, if I need to be the bad guy, I'll be the bad guy, right? Because this can't continue to go on. I have to have more control or more visualization over the financial health of the district. And, you know, I'm asking honestly, is that, you know, is that a policy that we don't have? Is that just a report that is not easy for you to provide, that we need to some other sort of forecasting program? I mean, what don't you have so that you can give me that information so that I can be the bad guy if I need to be? And to be clear, I just want to say, I'm not saying that we don't meet 100%, 120% the needs of an IEP, but I would ask, my assumption is not every para that we have is required by an IEP, right?
Correct.
Yes. So, and just as an aside note, before you ask, Marshall and I, you remember, we had a lot of conversations about our para populations and the numbers and stuff like that as part of the levy and a couple of times. And one of the things that we talked about was kind of doing a study, you know, this was way back when, kind of our paras and stuff, because actually, I won't even say that I was the one that came up with this. Our para population is sometimes a factor of 2 from a similar district. And Marshall's point, and I think it was a good point, is it's challenging because different districts, and stop me if I go wrong, classify different on that sheet, and they might not call it a para. So it's not an apples to apples comparison or something like that. So you're kind of comparing apples to oranges, which I'm certainly willing to admit that sounds certainly like a realistic explanation to me. But it does head scratch, why do we have 2 comparative to, you know, other districts and such large population and all of that stuff. So again, I know I said a lot, but again, the heart of my question is, what do you need, or what do I need to do from policy to put some more controls on this?
So I'll start it off by saying this isn't a unique situation in Granite Falls. I think if we went and looked at every school district's, many of our surrounding school district reports, they probably, their fund balance declined. We just don't have room to decline. It was challenging for everybody last year.
Right.
And I can compile that data to see how much everybody's fund balance declined, just so we can have something to compare to. One of the things I'm going to do, and I drafted Jennifer to come with me, is we're going to go around to several of our neighboring school districts, and we're going to partner with them and ask them, how do you operate? How do you run your district? How do you have this many parents? How do you do the K-3 class size compliance? How many student supervisors do you have? What do your classrooms look like? How do you pay for your extracurricular sports? All of these things, just to see what all of our neighboring districts are doing and compile as much information as we can about how other people are doing things like Sultan and Lakewood and Cedro and Monroe, some of the more similar than not districts to us, just to see how they're managing this, because we know it's not unique to us, but maybe there's ways we could do it a lot better than what we do it. And I'm not going to begin to think that we have all the answers. We need to try and combine with other districts and see how they're doing it.
Yeah.
I know that doesn't help right now with what reports can I give you that tell you where we're headed. You know, we had 2 payrolls so far this year, and the first one doesn't really count. So we probably need to get 2 more payrolls. My next step I'm going to do is I've asked for all the timesheets for October as they come in,
Right.
and I'm gonna analyze every single timesheet and see what people are billing us for outside their normal workday and why they're doing it. Is it necessary? How do we dial back? Who's approving it? All these things, because we get a stack of timesheets like this of people doing extra things. And why are we doing extra things? Are these needed? That's my next step. So I'm going to do a deep dive into that. But it's going to be probably middle of October before we get all the timesheets back for, or middle of November before we get all October's timesheets back. Honestly, that's a piece of the puzzle that we have a hard time forecasting because, you know, we just don't know ahead of time how much extra hours people are going to put on their timesheet and how principals are going to approve it. And we really need to get a grip on that this year. And so that's my next step, is to get a grip on why principals are approving extra time for their employees, why employees are submitting for extra time. In the best case scenario, I would hope that would only be grant funded things, but it's not. So I need to report back to you in December on what my findings are on that.
Yeah, so sorry, a couple more things. So first off, Marshall, I really appreciate you taking the initiative and going to other districts and talking to them. I think that that will really help. And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so let me, I should have said this. I'm not expecting for you to come up with an answer right this second. And I apologize for not prefacing my statement with that. But I guess everything you said, I think is wonderful, but I guess the point that's still out there, I guess I don't understand or would like to talk about deeper in a time when you are prepared to talk about it deeper is that, but still it's not addressing like what in the system, because I don't know necessarily the day-to-day of how you calculate expenses and finances and all that stuff. But you know, what is it that we're not doing, or what system do you need in place, or you know, what needs to tweak so that maybe moving forward, and maybe this is completely Carl, gosh, in this world, there's no way you can do it. That like, you know, maybe when we have hires, it's attributed to, hey, this will increase, you know, this is over our, you know, our revenue, or, you know, this is, you know, $50,000 more than we have expensed for this, or, you know, or some more detail so that I know that when I'm making those decisions, that I'm not, you know, basically shepherding us to a situation like this. And I know last year is an anomaly and, you know, sort of an anomaly coming out of COVID and stuff like that. But I think that the piece that is missing is more controls or foresight or budgeting, or, you know, people getting in payrolls quicker, or there's pieces of this that are missing that allow you to do your job better, so you can give us information so that I can do my job better is kind of where I'm going. So obviously I'm not directing you because I can't direct you. I direct Dr. Middleton, but one of the things that I'm going to ask Dr. Middleton to do is, you know, look into this deeper, because I don't know the answer, but I know there's got to be something so that we can get better at this. So I don't want to belabor the point.
Yeah, what I would like to see, in all honesty, is it's a gap analysis. And so when I see that, I mean, the 5% directive, the 5% desire has been around before I was here. Right. So it's been before, you know, this year. And as I just see the 21-22 year-end report, we have a $900,000 gap from the goal of where we landed. And to Carl's point, it's really hard unless we have at least the start of a definition of, from your financial expertise, like where, in your opinion, where you believe that $900,000 gap came from. So what I would like to see in all of these reports, monthly, quarterly, whatever that we see going forward, would be something of, there's an expected fund balance. Here's our current fund balance, the gap justification. So in your, you know, professional opinion, why this gap exists, and then what are the actions to close that gap, right? Because if we just keep letting it go on and hire people because, you know, it's, once again, it's like, well, here's the next thing to do, but it feels like, you know, we'll read these reports and Carl will be like, I don't know what I like. We need kind of like a, you know, explain it to me like I'm 5, kind of overarching view of the status of why we had a $900,000 gap. Because then I look at that also, one of the stats that jumped out to me is we have 20 more paras across the school district in a time span in which we increased our SPED education by 23 students. So it was almost a 1-to-1 in SPED to paras. And we have 420, students that qualify under, SPED right now. So that's just it's a very large, ratio. It's almost 100% of what's coming in. So, if time cards, right, you mentioned time cards, what's approved, why, is that a policy issue? Like, those are more of what I'd be looking for in a gap analysis to say like, hey, we missed by $900,000. We can attribute 300,000 of that to unanticipated time card entries. And what's the path to close that, right? Is it a policy issue? Is it, Dr. Middleton having discussions with, principals on what's going on? Or is it just literally that we just forecasted poorly, right? And we just need a better understanding of the needs of our schools. And if that's the case, then, then we have to go through, right? It's either we need more money, right? We don't have the resources that are in place right now. So we need more money to pay the resources to come in, or we are over implementing resources. It's one of the two, right? So we just need to know, are we hiring too many people, or are we needing to find a new revenue stream, some way to get more money in there. And so that's just what I'm looking, and that will help me and hopefully the rest of the board give more clear guidance. Because once again, even since I've been here since March, the gap for that 5%, it'll look better and then it just decreases. And I think we're at what, 1.7 or 2.7 right now. So I mean, we're almost down to half of our allocated goal. And when I look at the 20 more paras across the time the 23 SPED students were enrolled, that right there would more than close the gap. So that's just something that the more clearly that we can see that, because once again, it's not that the board doesn't directly hire paras or anything like that, but if we can help guide and steer the conversation from a Dr. Middleton level, on down, that's what would be really helpful. So in closing, just gap analysis. I can have a meeting with you on the side too, just to kind of explain more so maybe what I'm looking for, but that would be super helpful so that we could just take a step back, 30,000-foot view, all the business jargon stuff, and say, okay, here's a place to start. Go, and then maybe Dr. M could say, okay, it looks like we have a big issue with time cards, like you were mentioning. Go specifically talk to other districts about what they're doing about this issue, because maybe that accounts for 500,000 of our $900,000 gap. So that's not necessarily questions or anything, but just my observations from seeing that stuff.
I'm frustrated. Kind of at our board, because we keep talking about paras and how we're confused as to why we have so many paras. Paras do so much more than just hang out with the kids with IEPs and 504s and the SPED classrooms. Our classrooms are overloaded right now. In the 4th grade, there are 5 classrooms with 29 kids in them and 1 classroom with 28 kids in them, with 1 teacher monitoring all of this. And the paras come in and help out. And I can't say for the other grades, but I know for the 4th graders, because I have been around them since they were babies, because my daughter is in the 4th grade and they've all grown up together. It is a hard class. It is a hard class this year. And I'm sorry, but I have a big heart for the paras because they do a lot. And I'm going to say a thing that nobody wants to say, but I don't understand why we don't talk about it more. And that's that the union's sucking us dry. That's where our money's going. We're wondering where our money's going. That's where our money's going. What are we at? 89%? Well, that's what it was. It's probably a lot more than that now, going to payroll and benefits with what's left over for our schools. So I know I'm not very popular with them, but I don't care. We need that because that's where our money's going.
Thank you. Any other questions? So I'm actually just going to share some thoughts because I'm trying to understand, and we've had this conversation each month. We put you up there on the hot spot by yourself. You're solo standing there, but the district is not a solo operation, right? So it really, I think, just listening to this conversation, it occurs to me that the gap analysis comes from all of the organizations. It comes from a collaboration between the business office, the HR department, and special education, and the procedures across the board to create the hiring. I don't know the class sizes in the youngest of the classes because my kids are a little bit older. They're middle school and high school now. But I know that my kids complain about behavior in their classes. I know that, you know, there are certain kids that are, I don't even know how to explain that. That being said, I think the gap analysis that we're discussing here, or the procedural or whatever's missing to sound the alarm or ring a bell to say we're coming into a problem, like, I think that's not just Marshall Cruz, right? That's a collaboration across the board of really coming up with that. I think for me, the part I opened this and I thought 2.7, really? Because we said 5. I sat here, no, we feel like we're getting close to 5. We think we're going to be 5. Well, we're probably going to be closer to 4.5. Well, we're more expenses, COVID, more expenses. We're going to be 4, 3.5. And then I opened it and I was like 2.7. If we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always gotten. I mean, 2.7 is better than I think the 1.8 that I started with, but 1.8 is nearly bankrupt. So 2.7 is somewhat of an increase over time, but I heard projections for a year, and so to be $870,000 gap and only looking at one bucket, I think, I don't know how to explain this. I have kids that are in their early 20s and they make a budget and they're really good at making a plan. And just like we are, we submit a beautiful plan every year. But then like things happen and you end up 20 bucking yourself to the poorhouse. And I don't know if it's all in the sped bucket or if we're 20 bucking ourselves to the poorhouse. Like it's not that much. So it's a few thousand here and a few thousand there. I don't know, but definitely we're going to need a deeper dive and we're going to need it sooner because Marshall, if we wait for 3 months of payroll, we're a third of the way through the year before we even know what we're doing wrong. And that scares me.
Well, I will, in response to that, we did build a budget and implemented a plan going into this year where we reduced the number of teachers that we have significantly to right size the classrooms.
But does right size like 1 to 29? I don't know. I'm just interested in what you come up with. Like, I don't, like Carl and like Peter, I don't think that just Marshall Cruz has to come up with this answer. But I hope that overall that all of the directors hear the concern that we have here, that the collaboration needs to happen together to get this under control, because it's not 10,000 here and 5,000 there. It's 870,000. And I think that Director Kincaid's point, because I'll be honest, I've said it a lot of times. I often ask Marshall, how much do we spend in payroll and benefits? I think we're closer to 91%. Is that true?
I think when I just did the calculation a couple of weeks ago, I think it was right around 89%.
So
there's some gray areas in there, like how much of the transportation co-op do you count as payroll and benefits? How much of like a student being placed out of district in Texas that costs us $300,000 or $400,000? How much of that should you attribute to salary and benefits? You know, those kind of things pull us away from, but there are things we can't spend on anything else though.
right. So you've heard me say it before, we run 5 schools on 11%.
Well, trust me, I know just as well. Yes, we sit here and we say, because it's the largest portion, it's the largest piece of the pie, right? It's super easy to point at. However, our largest piece of the pie they can go right down the street and make another 15 grand a year. So as
Well, I'm
much as we're
I'm not
feeling like
saying-
they're sucking us dry, it's like, I mean, we just have to call a spade and like, we're in this, that's why I'm calling for that gap analysis, because as great as that would be, to your point, Carly, we're already understaffed in certain areas and we're still in this position where we're spending all this and we pay less than surrounding districts.
Well, that's what Carl's been
Right, and that's-
with the regionalization.
Right. And
By the way, thank you,
Yeah.
Director Carey,
and
for
appreciate that. And
doing that.
And I point to Paris mainly because we had the large presentation there. But I mean, all in all, I think that it's just that there has to be, not to say that there isn't, but that's my request is just such a magnifying glass needs to be put on when we're doing something, whether it be personnel decisions, whether it be repairs, whether it be, whatever. Before we had this conversation about like, is there a certain spend threshold that needs to go in front of the board? We may be dying the cuts, from all these $10,000, $5,000 purchases, like you said, $20 here and there adds up to you being bankrupt. Like that's what it almost feels like here. I mean, $900,000, it's a lot of money, but a couple head count that maybe that weren't technically required, but are nice to haves and some, various expenses that happen across the year could maybe cut that in half. Right. And that's more of my ask is if we can look at it at a much higher altitude so we can help make those decisions. Cause I don't want to place it on one specific group or, make this, sweeping characterization. But, I feel like we're just up here screaming the same thing every month. And unless we have, clearer direction, then I don't know clearer data, I guess I should say, then I don't know how we can provide better direction. So.
Just one additional thing to say is that when we built the budget this year, we knew we were going to have this gap we needed to make up. Our bargaining units were very willing to work with us for this year to help give us the room to make up the gap. And we knew that we had some like increased enrollment. Our enrollment is up somewhere 70 to 100 kids over what it was last year, and it's above budget, which I'll present enrollment next one. And we knew that we had some class size opportunities. We have a bargaining agreement that tells us what we need to pay people, but also tells us what the goal is for the class sizes. And we're within the range of the goals of all the schools and all the class sizes. And I know that 4th and 5th grade is higher than anybody would want, but that's part of how the school districts all over Western Washington have bargained to keep salaries up, is to have class sizes of 27, 28, 29 in the 4th and 5th grade levels. But we've probably reduced $700,000 or $800,000 in certificated salaries out of the budget, and that is being realized this year. And we have probably $1.2 million just in enrollment revenue, and then another $1 million in inflationary revenue. So there's a pretty big opportunity to recapture that $900,000. We just need to confirm that how we're actually running matches with what our plan was, or is close enough that, there was even some buffer built into the plan. So just matches close enough that we're not in alarm mode yet. And just finishing up our second payroll, I can do an analysis, but really 3 is kind of the magic number.
Just out of curiosity too, so you mentioned, right, increased enrollment, so obviously more money coming in, but obviously for every 17 students or roughly, we need another staff member to teach. So hypothetically, right, we get another 170 students, we need another 10 teachers. How much of, I'll just use the one teacher example just to keep math simple. How much of having 17 students come in and needing to hire one certified staff member do those 17 students cover? Is it is it there's a 30% surplus left over? Or is it like we're barely scraping by?
So this year enrollment came in almost perfectly in that we didn't have to add any elementary staff, any elementary teachers, I believe.
Okay.
So, and we were able to eliminate 3 that were doing virtual academy work. So, and then there was opportunity at the high school. We had a couple of a teacher leave, and we had another teacher that we were able to share with Crossroads too, because the high school enrollment is not growing very well. And they had pretty small class sizes last year at the high school. So they still have a lot of pretty small class sizes at the high school. So enrollment actually came in, you couldn't have like put the students in the right places any better than the way they fell.
Okay.
So we're really not having to spend, other than some support staff, really any money on instructional staff. And the middle school, we didn't have to add any teachers.
Okay.
Everything, we kept our teaching staff. We actually reduced our teaching staff through attrition. They just, teachers left, and we had small enough class sizes in certain places that it just worked out.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful to see as like the year over year, teacher headcount, cost for educators versus revenue generated from enrollment.
Right.
And seeing like year over year, like this year we've increased, 14%, which equals, 1.2 million or, whatever that number is for enrollment. And our cost for the teachers has increased, whatever the CBA, ended up being, which equaled out to this. So we've got an increase in funds. That would be a great thing to see, just like at a high level, so that as we're seeing, right, we could say, well, we could have been in this position. Okay, now where else can we find more areas to gather more money?
Right.
So,
and honestly, there is tremendous pressure to provide more support in classified staff to all the schools.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of requests for extra time, which that's for me, number one priority for me is trying to get a handle on why there's so much request for extra time.
yeah. Okay.
One thing I want to add, and it's in another unpopular opinion, but we don't talk about it, and I don't know why, is our admin staff, our administrators, and how much money they make and where, what's necessary and what's not. On here, I know we need them, but at the same time, our K-8 principals, we have 3 of them, and we're paying for them out of pocket because they're not funded. So
Not principals.
Assistant principal.
assistant principals, excuse me, that's what I meant to say. So there's just, things we don't talk about that maybe we could.
Any other questions for Marshall? Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Items from the floor or any. We have nobody signed up for public comment. Moving to 5A, tabled that until the meeting on December 7th. So 5B, the second reading to amend policy 1410, executive or closed sessions. Discussion.
Just to be clear, so we're not talking about 1400.
No, we tabled that until December 7th.
Oh, okay. I was not aware of that. Okay. Was that voted on at the last meeting or something, or?
Get on 2 minutes before you arrived here tonight.
Oh, okay. Got it. Great.
Any discussion on 1410?
No.
Make a motion that we accept the second reading to amend policy 1410, executive or closed sessions.
Second. Oh, she got it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Discussion.
Oh, sorry. 5C, this is a new policy, second reading to amend policy 1420, proposed agenda and consent agenda. Discussion.
No.
I motion that we approve the second reading to amend policy 1420, proposed agenda and consent agenda.
Second.
Made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
5D, second reading to amend policy 3122, excused and unexcused absences. Any discussion?
No.
Make a motion that we approve the second reading for policy 3122, excused and excused absences.
Second.
Made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
5E, a new policy, the second reading to adopt policy 6112, rental or lease of district real property. Any discussion?
Make a motion that we approve the second reading of policy 6122, rental or lease of district real property.
Motion's been made
I'll second.
and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Did you say aye?
I said that.
Okay, I didn't hear you. Sorry. I'm like, we'll just wait on you. All right, unfinished. 5F. First and second reading to amend policy. So this is a first and a second reading to amend policy 2030, service animals in schools. Discussion.
So the only thing I had on this one, I thought it was kind of funny about mini horses, but anyway, there's a part where it says, it is a civil infraction to misrepresent an animal as a service animal. A student's parent or guardian who believes their student needs to bring a service animal to school, or an employee who wishes to bring a service animal to school must submit written requests to the building principal. This is the part that there's kind of iffy. It says the building principal in consultation with section 504 coordinator or director of special services as appropriate will determine whether to permit the service animal in school. Employees will make their request for a service animal accommodation with human resources. And it says the principal shall not ask about the nature or extent of a person's disability, but may take 2 inquiries to determine whether an animal qualifies as a service animal. The principal may ask if the animal is required because of a disability and work or task the animal has been trained to perform. However, it says the principal shall not require documentation such as proof that the animal has been certified, trained, or licensed as a service animal, or require that the service animal demonstrate its task. So this is the part that's kind of contradictory of that, where it says the principal may not make these inquiries about the service animal when it is readily apparent that the animal is trained to do work or perform tasks for a person with a disability. So my question is, if the animal is not readily apparent that it is trained to do the work or perform tasks, is then the principal allowed to ask these questions or never? Like what, there's no point in this last sentence if the principal can't ask about that.
So actually, that was the same end of that. Yeah, exactly. The readily available. Jennifer, are you prepared to answer questions on this? I guess,
Yeah.
will you come up here so that because then we can talk to you, otherwise it's in the audience that I'm not sure we're supposed to, but because it's
Okay.
first and second.
Yes,
So help us understand what readily apparent means.
okay, so readily apparent would be a service animal that would be a guide dog. If somebody is, has its vest, it says guide dog, it's, obviously has a harness and the person is, you can see that they're blind. If a service animal is there for somebody who maybe has hearing loss or has anxiety or, PTSD, that's not gonna be readily apparent. So that's what that means.
It feels squishy.
Yeah.
Do we have a definition of, is this wording right out of like a WASDA policy, or do we have a definition somewhere for readily apparent?
If I can explain, this is the updated WASDA policy, model policy.
Okay,
We've been working with our lawyers on exactly as HR, what we can talk to employees about. As in normal ADA, it's very clear exactly what you can ask. When it comes to service animals, it's very protected. So we're just trying to carefully navigate how we go through bringing those animals into the schools and into our workplaces so that they can do their jobs to support our employees and students, but also that we're doing the right thing.
So I had a follow-up question, just that, so I guess legally, I think there's a difference between a service animal and an emotional support animal. And perhaps you have asked about this, or maybe you don't know the answer, and if you don't know, that's a fair answer too, but other students can have an allergy to a dog.
Yeah.
Or a miniature horse, right? Or, you know, even the most well-trained dog could snap at a student, or I don't know, you know what I mean? I mean, more probably just allergies. So how do we handle that, where you have one employee or student in a room that has a service animal that maybe other students or staff or have allergies?
Yeah, I mean, we've had that discussion. I think in the case of allergies, it's, you know, setting them apart.
I mean, we do have great air filtration systems these days, with very
Yes, so
expensive
it's really those
filters.
kind of accommodations, trying to get them as far away as possible.
Is it just covered by risk management? I mean, if something happened, is it just a risk management issue?
When it comes to if an animal were to bite somebody, something like that, there are reasons, it's in the policy, reasons for excluding an animal. So if their handler isn't handling them, if they do disrupt the learning environment, excessive barking, or, you know, being a distraction just by not doing its job, then those are reasons for exclusion, and that is in the procedures of policy that kind of outlines that piece.
I think we should start getting the procedures at the same time, because.
Yeah. Are the principals like trained on how to, because it says that they make the decision, are they trained on how to decipher whether or not someone's, you know?
So it's
Well,
not
that comes
you that
down
makes the
to,
decision?
so when it's a service animal, it's
Yeah.
that question, is this animal, you know, trained to, you know, assist, or do you have a disability and is this animal trained to specifically address that disability?
And do they have to accept everything they hear? I mean, because I know some people who'd be like, this is my chihuahua and it pulls my wheelchair, like how is that possible? You know what I mean? So,
A readily apparent, but
yeah,
but-
but that's what I'm asking is
Yeah.
like, do they have like a training as far as they know what is readily apparent? Is what I'm asking.
no, there isn't a training for them, and
Okay.
you know, when it comes to students, the principals usually work with Beth,
Okay,
directors.
Is that in the procedure to work with the directors from HR and special education?
Yeah, so part of the policy that we added was the verbiage that, you know, employees would come to us for an accommodation request to bring an animal to work with them. Its principals would work with Beth when it comes to students, because that under student services is the 504s.
gotcha.
Special needs they might have.
Really quick, then to kind of says it is a civil infraction to misrepresent. Is that in the policy of how to determine when a civil infraction has been incurred? Like to go into Carly's Chihuahua example, like I'm just wondering, because it's like it's stated that it's an infraction, but there's also a lot of protections, rightfully so. But I'm just wondering how then the infraction becomes a thing, if that's part of the policy.
I don't know how that we go about enforcing that.
Okay.
I think it's really a matter of when we're working with, in our case, with employees, to you know, inform them of that, and then we have them agree that, you know, there are reasons for exclusion. We have to identify where those animals go to the bathroom.
Gotcha.
You know, those type of things, and having them agree to, you know, they're also not.
Okay. And it would probably also come to light if, for instance, the Chihuahua bit somebody.
Yeah.
And then that investigation would lead to the fact that it was not in fact a service animal. More importantly than that, understanding that there are a lot of protections under this for the student or the professional that's working that requires this. Going off of the allergy or something like that, or maybe fear of dogs or something, is there a notification system, right? So like if you have a student that is wildly allergic to dogs, but can you inform the classroom? Like, is anybody that's within that class receiving an email or something notifying them that there will be a service dog present?
So the reverse of this is, the disability is protected
Mhm.
and why they have the service animal is protected information, right? So we cannot require an announcement, like if it were an
Yeah.
employee on their door that says service dog
Right.
at work, if they voluntarily wanted to put that on their door.
Okay.
To deal with the allergy piece. I don't know that we notify people in classes.
Because I'm just wondering, because I could just feel, getting emails from parents that are like, why all of a sudden is there a dog in my child's class? She's horribly allergic to dogs, something like that. Like, I should be notified before this sort of thing. So just something.
Yeah, and I can certainly ask our lawyers about that. I've
Okay.
been working with them for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
To create this amendment and then just kind of like, what can we do and
Right.
and not.
Right, yeah, just making sure that we're informing where needed to be informed. Okay.
So I guess just a couple of points. So the policy is written squishy because the law is written squishy, right? And I guess I just want to caution the board of extending our scope here. Because if you read the WACs, the reference, it says stuff like WAC 162266060. Overall objectives, people with disabilities must be afforded the full enjoyment of places of public accommodation to the greatest extent possible. Then it says in 1626135, removal of a dog, guide, or service animal. When risk justifies removal, it is unfair practice for a place of public accommodation, which we are, to ask that a trained dog, guide, or service animal be removed unless that place of public accommodation can show that the presence, behavior, or actions of that dog, guide, or service animal constitutes an unreasonable risk of injury or harm, property, or persons. Unfair practice to remove a trained dog or service animal from the entire place of public accommodation because a dog, guide, or service animal presents a risk of injury or harm when in place of public accommodation. Risks to property or other persons must be immediate or reasonably foreseeable under the circumstances, not remote or speculative. Risks to persons may be given more weight than risks to property. Risks for injury or harm may be given more weight than risks or slight injury. For example, blah, blah, blah. So duty to reasonably accommodate when risk justifies the removal of service animal of place of accommodation must be made to reasonably accommodate the person with the disability. So there's a lot of squishiness there. It goes on to talk about all the things we're talking about, how we can't demand that they remove the dog, essentially have to. So, I mean, this is state law and we don't have the ability to modify state law. And if we modify a policy, that puts us, in my mind, in legal peril. So I don't disagree that it's squishy, but everything I've read is extremely squishy. So. Yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Actually, I like that you pulled that up. And are we allowed to just add the legal reference that you just pulled up, the 135, was it 26?
Yeah, it's all referenced in there by this. It's referencing WAC 16226, which is everything in that section. That's what I'm looking at. And I read
This
it.
one, right, 162-26.
Yeah.
I gotta sit back further so I can see better with these glasses. I keep forgetting. Anyway. All right, I just wanted to, I sort of wanted to just bring up, and like you said, some of it's in the procedure, but we don't see the procedure, which sometimes is easier to help us to understand the policy.
Right.
If we saw the procedure that went with it, right? But we're sort of reading in a vacuum.
Yep.
All right, any further discussion? Nope. You have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the first and second reading to amend policy 2030. Service animals in schools.
I will second.
The motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Right, we have new business. We have none. Consent agenda. Is there any discussion?
Nope.
And I think
It's approved by unanimous consent.
it's approved by unanimous consent. Personnel report just goes with it, right?
Yeah, that's all in the
So
consent agenda.
I think that, so that's 7C approved by consent. So 8A, we're adjourned at 8:15 p.m.